to the This Gal Travels podcast, the show that helps you travel more, travel easier, and travel better. I'm Trina, and today I'm going to talk about why your next adventure should be in Africa. My best pro traveler tip is at the end, so definitely listen all the way through. It's a good one today. So when you travel or go on vacation, what kind of travel are you looking for? What kind of vacation do you like? Do you like big adventure, hardcore adventure? Do you like softer adventures? Do you like a lazy beach adventure? Do you like more luxury travel where shopping and eating are the highlights of the trip? Well, I will bet you can find what you're looking for in Africa. And if you haven't considered Africa as a vacation destination, let me know after this podcast, would you? And if so, did any particular country catch your attention? Also, if you have been to Africa, I'd love to know your favorite place or the place you still dream of going. Even if you've been to a whole bunch of places, then you have this, but I really want to go to. Go ahead and put that in the comments as well. Africa is an absolutely huge landmass. I mean, you can take a whole bunch of other big countries and stuff them into the landmass that is Africa. Not to mention, it is 54 individual countries. Okay, so when I give a few samplings of countries that are good for this or good for that, there is no way I can list every country that is good for something. So I'm inevitably going to say, well, it's good to go here for that reason, and I'm going to miss the one that you love the most. So feel free to leave it in the comments, but please don't come at me with hate because, I can't list everything. But I am going to give you some ideas of where to go. And I'll be honest, if you want to pause this, if you don't know your African geography really well, which I don't expect you to, but if you don't know it really well, you might want to pull up a little map of Africa while you're listening so that you have an idea of the places I'm talking about. So we'll pause for just a moment while you pull up the map. Okay, let's go. From its deserts to its rainforests, Africa has some of the most stunning beauty you will ever find. You have deserts like the Sahara, of course, the Kalahari, and the Namib Desert, and that's Namib as in Namibia. There's a whole lot of cool desert stuff down there. I cannot wait to get down there. And the rainforest region, which you also might call jungle, have life just everywhere. And that doesn't mean there's not wildlife anywhere. We're going to get to the wildlife in just a minute. But I just want to show how many different landscapes there are. And there's mountains. There are the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, and there's mountains in Ethiopia where you can actually go and see, I think it's the Simeon Mountains in Ethiopia. And if you're lucky, you might actually see the Ethiopian wolf. You know what? I didn't even know there was an Ethiopian wolf. I've been doing research for this podcast, and it's like, wow, that sounds really cool. I could see an Ethiopian wolf. And that's for your mountain lovers. Believe it or not, there is actually a place or two that you can snow ski. Admittedly, it's probably not world-class skiing, and yeah, Africa's not where you come for the grand ski vacation, but that is how diverse the landscapes are here. As I mentioned, there's the beautiful beaches and the dense forests and waterfalls and gorgeous rivers. And, you can do, anywhere there's a river, you can probably do a canoe ride or a motorboat ride. And there's, in amongst that, there's people that live there like in stilt villages. And there is so much variety in Africa. You absolutely will not be bored with the landscape. And of course, you have the gorgeous landscapes, and then when you go on safari and you have these brilliant savannas that just lay out right in front of you, and they're filled with animals. Or sometimes you got to go searching for them, and sometimes the search is as fun as anything. Because believe me, the first time you see a giraffe in person, that's not in a zoo. It's just going to be like, wow. They are amazing animals. And there's all sorts of animals that are absolutely amazing to see in real life, but giraffes are one of the most impressive. And then if you are going on safari, because that is what a lot of people do, a lot of people just come to Africa for safari, and that's completely fine, but then you have the big five. The big five are lion, elephant, leopard, buffalo, and rhino. And those are the ones that you can see in like Kenya, Tanzania. That's the American pronunciation. Here, they often say Tanzania. Botswana, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Zambia. A lot of the eastern and southern countries have those animals. And then, of course, in Rwanda and Uganda, you can go trek and see mountain gorillas. I mean, that is absolutely amazing. And then you might come up with some unique animal that just sparks your imagination, so you want to go try see that, and that might be what makes you choose a specific country. Like the shoebill stork. I would love to see a shoebill stork in the wild. If you're not sure which is the shoebill stork, that is the really prehistoric looking stork that has the big chunky bill. And if it rattles its bill, they'll say often, they liken it to like a machine gun firing. And they are just this weird looking bird, and they look absolutely awesome. And if I'm in Uganda doing the gorilla trek, I am definitely going to also make time to try and go see a shoebill stork on a bird watching tour. Now, I'm not a bird watcher. I'm not a serious bird watcher, but I have to say I'm a bird appreciator. Half the time, I don't know the names of the birds I see, but I enjoy seeing them and I enjoy hearing them. If you like birds, Senegal and the Gambia on the far west coast of Africa are fantastic. They are probably, I want to say they're the best places to go bird watching in Africa. As I say, I'm not a hardcore birder, but I know they've just got tons and tons of species, and they are everywhere. They're easy to see. There's the Juge bird sanctuary up in northern Senegal that is just, I mean, there's a whole pelican island up there, and a lot of birds migrate through there. So if you time it well, you're going to see tons of birds. But even just walking around, you see and hear a lot of birds there. So even if you're mild on birding, that is a great place to go. And I'll bring this up, is you might want to go on safari, but safari might not be the only thing you want to do in Africa. As I say, some people, that is their only trip. And I will give you this advice. If you are going to come on a safari tour, I still always recommend when you take a tour, leave a few extra days either at the beginning or the end of the trip, before or after your tour, to go and explore something that you didn't get to see on the tour, whether it's walking around the capital city where your hotel is, or there's something that you wanted to see that they didn't cover on the tour that you might take a few days to go travel to. But I always recommend doing a little bit more than just the tour, so you can get a little taste of the country on your own. You know, travel independently for just a few days and get a real feel for the place that you might not get on the tour. But as I said, maybe you want to see animals, but it's not the only thing you want to do on your African safari. And that's a little bit where West Africa excels. If you are interested in a mix of culture and food and history, and you want a little wildlife in there, a lot of the countries in West Africa have a little bit of everything. No, they don't have the big five. The chances of seeing a lion or a leopard or something like that are much slimmer, although you can make it happen if you go to certain private reserves. You can still have all sorts of fun on safari in West Africa. You just might not see as big of animals, but they are still all sorts of fun. I have an entire video on Mole National Park up here in northern Ghana, and the cool thing about there is that you get a lot of close encounters with animals. They hang around the hotel where you're likely to stay, and they will just walk right through. The baboons, keep your door locked because the baboons will try and get into your room and see if you have any snacks to steal. But the warthogs will just walk by, no problem. Sometimes even the little antelope that you'd think would be super skittish, I mean, they're not gonna let you get real close to them, but they're not absolutely scared of you either. And then the elephants just come and they go wherever they want because they know they're safe. They know no one's gonna hurt them. In 2019, I went out to go for a walking safari, got to the ranger station a little early, and the elephants just came through, and they meandered across the street, just right past the ranger station, and stopped and were eating. And then the rangers, came by about 10 or 15 minutes later, but we got a great show with the elephants. And I've seen them come up close to some of the rooms. And so whether a safari is your total focus and that is your main goal, or if you just want to have a little wildlife mixed in with the rest of your adventure, depending on what country you choose, you can have a lot of different types of adventure. And then there are some adventures where you can actually interact with the animals. In the Gambia, if they have animals they can let you pet or touch, they're gonna do it. There's a reptile farm, there's a crocodile farm, which I'll talk about in a second, but then there's the monkey park. Oh man, the monkey park in the Gambia was so much fun. You go in, and at the beginning, it doesn't cost a lot to get in. You probably spend more on buying some peanuts and bananas. And the trick with the bananas is you hold on to the bananas till the monkeys jump on your shoulder. And that's generally the green monkeys. There's green monkeys and red monkeys. But at one point, I had like one sitting on my head, one on each shoulder, and I was feeding them and they were all around me, and I have a whole video on it. I will link it in the description. Also with Mole National Park, I'll link that video in the description too. But, you know, it was an absolutely fun experience, and it's harmless for the monkeys. I mean, monkeys are gonna steal food from you anyways if you have it. So I don't see any harm done. And the red colobus monkeys, they were really interesting because they only ate the peanuts. They didn't take the bananas. But afterwards, they kind of hung around, and they actually let us pet them, and completely by choice. And evidently they hadn't done this before, and they just liked me and Tim, and they let us pet them. So, you know, as I say, in the Gambia, if they have an animal they can safely let you touch, they'll let you touch it. The crocodile pond there, there's always a mystical story with the crocodile pond as to why the crocodiles don't hurt people. And basically, someone did a favor for someone, and they made a promise that they wouldn't hurt, and then the humans and the crocodiles make a promise not to hurt each other, and then they live in peace for centuries, and that's why you can pet the crocodiles. And as I say, you can't force a crocodile to do anything. The ones in the Gambia had all sorts of space they could have been where there were no tourists. So if they're up by the spot where they know the tourists are going to be, then they've got to be okay with it, because if they didn't want to, they would just go away. But the ones in the Gambia were all sleepy. We got there in the afternoon. They had been fed in the morning. They were all sleepy. It was afternoon, and they weren't really moving much at all. Very slow movement. The one here in Ghana, and they gave a whole safety lecture and all that. The one in Ghana, there was no safety lecture, and they coaxed the crocodile up out of the water, and it's whichever one feels like playing with tourists that day. And I'll be honest, I was a lot more hesitant to touch the tail of one that was up and moving around and lively, even though they did have this magical agreement from centuries past that humans and crocodiles wouldn't hurt each other. But it was a totally different experience. And as I say, you can't force a crocodile to do anything. So there are some places you can have actual interaction with the animals. And if you're an animal lover like me, as long as I know the animals aren't being hurt or coerced, it's just all sorts of fun. Whether you want a big African safari or a smaller experience, it is definitely available somewhere in Africa. Another reason to visit Africa is the incredible cultural experience you will have. There are more than 3,000 tribal groups and somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 languages. And one of the things that's really amazing when you travel here is that people love to share their culture. You start asking questions and you are going to get stories, you are going to get explanations, and people are generally happy to share. Now, there may be some things that are off limits that aren't for tourists, and you have to respect that, but a lot of times they'll let you in on at least a little bit of it. It certainly wouldn't be totally uncommon to be invited to a wedding, or in Benin you can attend voodoo festivals. I say voodoo, they say vodun. There's a few different versions of the word, but you can see these traditional religion festivals. Now, they might not appreciate tourists staying for the entire night, but they will certainly let you have a glimpse of how their ceremonies go, and it is amazing. Here in Ghana, if you follow my YouTube, you might have seen my live broadcast from the Fire Festival, and that's the second time I've done it. I love the Fire Festival here. It is just joyous, and people will see me, you know, I'm sticking out like a sore thumb, glowing as much as the torches, and they'll see me, and they'll welcome me. They'll be thrilled that I am sharing this festival with them. And then there's a festival down in Cape Coast called Ogwa Fetu Afahe. I'm probably screwing up the name, but it's like a 5-day festival. And I was welcome there as well. There was a part or two that they weren't so sure of, but I had the special photography permit that let me in. One guy had a problem because I think he thought when they sacrificed the cow, they only do one, but they sacrificed the cow. I think he thought I was going to be exploitative in the way I handled it, and he didn't want me there. But I had the little permit, and I was certainly not going to be exploitative. I've been to a few things where people sacrifice animals, both here in Africa and in Southeast Asia, and I'm not going to pass judgment. That's the way they do things. That's their culture. I eat meat, so I'm not going to be a hypocrite about it. Besides festivals, you could also, in some places, you could arrange a homestay, and you could actually stay in a village and learn how they live their lives in a village. Or you can do volunteer work, which gives you an entirely different type of insight into a local community. When I started traveling, one of my philosophies was that I wanted to go to places that were as different as possible from home. I wanted to experience new things that I just were different from my culture. And that's one of the things that's pretty easy to do here in Africa. And yet, especially if you're from the US, but you'll probably also see some things here that feel very familiar because of Black culture. You'll see something and say, oh, I see where that comes from. I mean, the roots of blues, rock and roll, and country music come from West Africa. And speaking of music and dance, the cultures across Africa, the music and dance, if you watch any of it at all and leaning towards the more traditional, you will see that every country, every region and every country has a very different style. The music and dance you'll see from Senegal and Mali and Ghana and Nigeria, which are all different from each other, but they are more similar than what you'll see, which is very different from what's going on down in southern Africa with Botswana and South Africa and that entire region. As I say, Africa is a big place. You're going to have a lot of diversity across the continent. So even if you know a little bit of African music, there is always more to discover. And the same goes for dance and the arts and crafts. The arts and crafts are amazing here. Pretty much everywhere in Africa has some awesome arts and crafts going on, depending on what the local materials are. But it's all handmade, and it's all done with a lot of great skill. Again, it varies a great deal from place to place based on those tribal traditions. This is where visiting museums and cultural centers help you get a better idea of the stylistic differences and the tribal differences and the philosophical differences between the different tribes, the different countries, and the different regions. And the truth is, while you're traveling, none of these things are hard to get to. Mostly, you just have to ask. But definitely, no matter where you choose to visit, if you have an opportunity to take part in a festival, do it. Because that's just all sorts of fun. So, when you travel, are you a history buff? Or even just a little bit of a history buff? I mean, this is Africa. Humanity started here, right? So, of course, there is incredible history here. You've got the pyramids of Giza in Egypt, of course. You've got Great Zimbabwe, which is an ancient city that would rival any grand ancient city of the ancient world. Ancient, ancient, ancient. I'm going to say that word 20 times, I can tell. There are, in West Africa, there's a strong history with the slave forts. And to be honest, you should go to them. You need to understand what the slave trade was about. If you come to West Africa and don't at least dabble in the history of the slave trade, you are missing out because it will enhance your understanding a great deal. You not only have the slave forts, but in Benin, you can walk part of the slave march, where they were taken before they got to their point of no return on the beach near Ouida. In Ethiopia, they have these underground churches, which look just amazing. I have not been there yet, and that's another place I just can't wait to go. I don't consider myself a huge history buff, but I mean, sometimes the history just oozes out of here, and sometimes it'll be part of the cultural experience, and then sometimes you just go just for the history of it. There is just so much history in Africa, and it is so important that even if you just get a little taste, it'll enrich your trip so much. By the way, I just added a new page to the website, and it's all about tours. Now, I know I don't usually go on tours, but sometimes I do because sometimes that's the only way to see a place. Or sometimes there's a day tour that I do. And I don't normally go on the big tours, but I know some people don't like the hassle. I did the big episode, the podcast episode on how to plan a trip, and I know some people don't like to do all that. So I've added a page to the website. I went through and I went to the places I've been, and I picked out a bunch of tours that basically looked really good to me. The kind of tour that I would take if I were the kind of person to take tours. A couple of them are tours I actually did, as I say, because sometimes there's only one way to see a place and you have to do a tour to do it. So I made this page, and I'm going to put a link in the comments, but I just wanted you to know that the tours I'm recommending are the kind that I would do. And you might think it's a weird selection of countries that I've put on the page, but it's places I've been, places I can vouch for, places where I can make an actual good judgment on the tour. I'm not just putting a bunch of tours up and hoping you buy something and trying to get money from you. Yeah, they're affiliate links, so I'll get a little commission if you do buy something. But the truth is, I really just chose places that I know well enough that I felt like I could pick out good tours for you. So if you don't want all the hassle of a big trip, and the tours include both Africa and Southeast Asia, so go ahead and take a look, because I think I made some really cool choices. Whether you choose to take a tour or not, as long as you're traveling, it's all good. You know what else is awesome in Africa? The food. Now, every country is very different on food. Heck, you'll find regional differences in the food. You can't even say that something's the same from one end of one country to another. And to be honest, a lot of places just, everyone has their own recipe, even if they're fairly similar. But the food in Africa is amazing. It's absolutely awesome. I've said this on some other podcasts, but just so you know, if you are ever in a place that eats with the hand, it's always the right hand. You always eat with your right hand. And if it's the kind of culture where you only eat with your right hand, you can still pick up your drink with your left and all that kind of thing. But what goes to your mouth should go with your right hand. It also means that all interactions with other people should be with your right hand. Passing money, handshakes, anything where you are interacting with someone, if it's right hand while eating, it's right hand in the culture. Just remember that. Also, the other quick tip is if you have a communal plate, just eat from what's in front of you. And I mentioned that for if you go to Ethiopia and end up eating with a family. The host will make sure you get the best bits, and they'll treat you right. But the one thing you want to do when you come to Africa is you want to sample the food. And sample all the food. Even if it's something you don't think you like, just try it. The worst is that you don't like it. I mean, no one's going to blame you if you don't like it. But if you don't try it, you're going to really miss out. And I mean both food in restaurants, like if you're in Morocco, you're going to want to try tagines and couscous. And in Morocco, they actually have really good coffee too. So if you're a coffee person, Morocco is fantastic. But try street food too, because there's no reason to be afraid of street food. In fact, a lot of times it's cooked fresher and more carefully than some of the fancy hotels and that do buffets and leave their food sitting out for hours. Yeah, so a lot of times the street food is just fresher. Of course, if it doesn't look good, then yeah, skip that one. But for the most part, don't be afraid of street food. Try everything. You're on this big trip, you're in this amazing place, and you're there to try things. You're there to experience new things. So always try the street food and try whatever the local delicacy is. So you try your fufu and your jollof in West Africa, you try your doro wot in Ethiopia, along with the injera. And getting used to the injera is an interesting thing in Ethiopia because it's like this giant pancake, but it's made out of a fermented batter, so it has little holes in it. And it's funny because we have Little Ethiopia in Los Angeles, and there's one place there called Mercado. It's probably the most authentic of all the Ethiopian restaurants there. And Tim would go, and he would be trying so hard to keep his hands clean that he would eat a lot of injera, and because you pick up the stews, whatever the different stews are, and and so he'd end up filling up on a lot of the injera, which is not exactly the idea. You're supposed to just go ahead and get messy. In fact, any culture where you eat with your hands, just plan to get messy. Accept it. You're gonna get messy. And you'll enjoy the food a lot more because then you can just dive in and not worry about staying neat and tidy. They will always have a place for you to wash your hands before and after the meal. But yeah, so you try that in Ethiopia, or you might try baboti in South Africa. I had to look that one up because I haven't been there yet. But there are so many foods. What I might recommend is once you choose a country to go to, find out what their top cuisines are. Find out their top 2, 3, 4, 5 dishes and just make sure you hit them all. And even if you're on a tour, if you know they have a specialty dish and you haven't had a chance to try it, ask what restaurant you can go to try those things. Do a little pre-research so you don't miss out. By the way, I have a whole podcast episode on eating local when you travel. So if you want to get a little more in depth on the subject, be sure to check it out. So what if you like big city life? You like shopping, you like nightlife and clubs and bars, and maybe you like the museum or art scene, or maybe you like urban adventures but a little grittier. You like to go see the graffiti in a city. There are so many cities here in Africa that are so amazing. A lot of people just show the rough side of Africa, but to be honest, Some of the major cities are, as I say, as modern as anywhere else in the world. And sometimes they're incredibly modern, and then they have a touch of old world to them too, and that's really cool. But cities like Dakar and Marrakesh and Nairobi and Cape Town and Accra and Addis Ababa and Kigali, these are places that are modern and equipped. You can have any type of urban adventure you might imagine anywhere else in the world. And I'm sure I've missed someone's favorite city, so if there is a city you love in Africa, let us know. Put it in the comments, the city and the country, and tell us why you love it. I'm sure it won't surprise you that if you're looking for adventure, you can absolutely get it here in Africa, no matter what level of adventure you're looking for. You like softer adventures, you like harder adventures, you can go bungee jumping at Victoria Falls, you can do whitewater rafting and kayaking in places like Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe. Those are all great for that. Here in Ghana, they have a canopy walkway, a rope bridge in Kakum National Park. And I've mentioned Mole National Park, you have a walking safari. And I have that on my second channel. I have the entire walking safari experience. I'll put a link for that as well. You want to do scuba diving and snorkeling and enjoy the beaches? You've got the Seychelles and Mozambique and Zanzibar. There are even places that are awesome for surfing in Africa. And as far as water sports, the first time I went snorkeling was in the Red Sea on my trip to Egypt, way back when. And it still stands as my absolute best snorkeling experience ever. Oh, and that snow skiing I mentioned? 4 countries, Lesotho, Morocco, South Africa, and Algeria all have snow skiing. And there's all levels of hiking and trekking in any of those wonderful landscapes, and you can take it as far as you want. It can be an easy hike, or it can be more challenging, just depending on your preference and your skill level. Oh, and in the desert, you could go sandboarding down dunes, or the dune bashing, which is like taking a truck and going flying over the dunes. Even the deserts have all sorts of wonderful activities. Of course, there's camel treks as well. Almost any kind of adventure you can imagine, and some you probably didn't even know existed, are here in Africa. By the way, if you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to subscribe, and if you have a friend that you think would enjoy it, please share and spread the word. Now, let's talk about budget. A lot of people think anything in Africa is going to be expensive. And of course, that perspective is a little different whether you're coming from the US or Europe or Australia or wherever you may be coming from is going to have an effect on that. The thing is, even if the flight is a little bit expensive, and of course you can set up price alerts and use points and do all sorts of things to try and bring your price down. You travel in the shoulder seasons, that sort of thing. But a lot of times once you get here, depending on the country of course, but a lot of times it's more affordable once you get here. Once you get here, there are a lot of ways to mediate your expenses. Often hotels don't cost anywhere near what they do in the Western world, so you can get nice accommodations for a lot less money. But then simple things like eating local food instead of fancy tourist restaurant food. A lot of times you can get an absolutely fantastic meal eating local for between $1 and $2, and you are not going to walk away dissatisfied. Not to mention, using local transportation is usually cheaper. Shared rides are abundant, whether it be in a tuk-tuk, which depending on where you are might be called a KK or a yellow, or many other things, or a trotro, which is the minivans. Those have multiple names as well. And those are always interesting experiences. They can be fun and interesting, but it's a great way to get around and save some money. And there might be times when you need a private driver. With Tim, a lot of times we did use a private driver more often than I would have done by myself. But even private drivers here aren't as expensive as you might expect. But I say use public transit whenever you can, eat local whenever you can. And I fully believe in what I call comfort budget travel, which means I get a room that is as cheap as I can that is still comfortable. A lot of places you'll visit in Africa, it might be, well, it costs a little bit extra to get there, but it's cheap once you're there. I'll be honest, when I was in Los Angeles, I looked at a river rafting trip in Northern California, which should have been a simple flight, a little bit of a drive, and then the trip, and then getting back. And I looked at the price of a trip that would have been less than a week. It would have been like 5 days. And I looked at it and said, I could go to Africa for that much money. So while if you travel domestically, as I say, no matter where you're from, It might be cheaper on one end because the flight costs less, but then all the amenities, eating and your stay and everything might be really expensive. And Africa's just the opposite. The plane ticket might be the expensive thing, and everything else is less expensive. So consider that before you worry about it being too expensive. And even the safaris. I know that in some places you have the private reserves, which are super expensive and super luxurious. And then you have the public national parks, which are much more affordable when it comes to the safari time. You're still going to have to pay for the vehicle and the guide and everything, but they're much more affordable. And I'll tell you that if you do the safaris in West Africa, they are very affordable. They're smaller, but very affordable. So just know that a trip to Africa doesn't have to break the bank. Now, I've been talking about all of the things you can do and see and everything from a fairly touristy visitor, traveler perspective. But one of the things you don't know that when you come to Africa is that because it is significantly different from home, depending on where you're traveling from, because it's different, you are going to grow. No matter what happens on this trip, you are going to learn, you are going to grow. And the experience, no matter what kind of experience you come seeking, you're going to find so much more. You're not only going to find amazing places, you're going to find amazing people. And as you travel through this incredible place, no matter which part of the continent you choose, you are going to find something new within yourself. I can guarantee it. Africa is magical that way. You will go home with a more open heart, a more open mind, and you will have had all these wonderful experiences that will be with you for a lifetime. Whatever your reason for coming to Africa, whether it is culture or history or adventure or safari or heritage, whatever the reason, you are going to find that and so much more. Okay, so today's pro traveler tip is I want you to choose 3 things that you look for in any vacation. When you sit down and plan your vacation, what is it that you like to do? What are your top priorities? And then I want you to go to Google or whatever your favorite search engine is and say Google the 10 best places to do X, whatever your activity is, in Africa. That's the key, put in Africa. So what are the 10 best places to learn surfing in Africa? Okay, and do that with your top 3 priorities. Then start seeing which countries they might overlap in, whether it's all in the same country, and then you're really lucky, but it might be adjoining countries, because you might be able to say, okay, I'm gonna go learn this here and go see that there. Once you see what countries start overlapping and have the activities that you like, I want you to research a little bit and see what kind of trip you can plan there. Start researching your travel options and then start planning it. Set your goal, set a date when you realistically believe you can go, and start planning that trip. Get yourself to Africa, start setting yourself up now for the trip of a lifetime. And as you're planning, check out my podcast on trip planning because I cover all sorts of important stuff. Thank you for joining me on today's podcast. I'll see you next time.